Hello, my friends. I am coming back at you with another fun process video where I give you a peek into my process and talk through some of the stuff that I do working on a surface. And today I wanted to share with you how I use really limited supplies. I'm using a Crayola marker, a ballpoint pen, and a little bit of white paint. And I want to show you how I push these three simple supplies on a surface with the hope to show and inspire you that you do not need a big budget in order to get creative or to create a dynamic surface. I'm always looking for ways to prove and show that you can use incredibly simple supplies and actually cheaper supplies as well to get creative. I spent many years working and creating on a budget. I was an art major with limited funds, and then I was a young adult that barely had enough money to buy art supplies when I was trying to grow this business that I run. And so over time, I've developed all these little hacks and tricks and ways that I can push my supplies really far so that I don't have to spend a lot of money on a variety of different high-end supplies. And more than anything, I just want to show you that with some intention, practice, thought, you can really take something cheaper or even just something simple and elevate it within your art. Takes a little practice, takes some time to figure out what works for you and what doesn't, but I think that showing this type of process could actually be really empowering and inspiring for those of you, especially right now, working and living on a budget, maybe wanting to get creative but feeling like you don't have the money to do it. I want to start doing more of these videos where I share very, very simple supplies that you could probably find at your local grocery store, drugstore, for an economic price. So what I'm going to do is fill my surface with just a floral design. This is one of the easiest things I can use to demonstrate this for you all. And you know that I love florals, but what I am doing is I'm using that Crayola marker to draw out my design. I'm going to limit my color just because I want to show you how you can limit things and still have that dynamic surface. But if you didn't already know, and I share this quite a bit, a Crayola marker, any water-based marker, can actually be stretched from using it for drawing, using it for coloring, but then adding water to it, and you can dissolve those lines and turn it into something that looks and feels a lot like watercolors. So if you are on a budget and you don't have the money to purchase a set of watercolors yet, you can actually use a packet of kids Crayola markers and they will behave a lot like watercolor paint. Even though my budget's a lot different these days and I have all kinds of really wonderful watercolor sets, I still love using this. I use it all the time because you're able to really achieve this beautiful, interesting look and feel when it comes to those lines. You can kind of dissolve them and they bleed and kind of blend with that water, and you can get some very, very pretty results. And I will also say that Crayola markers are quite pigmented, so all of the colors that you get in a packet end up working really well and actually having some very dynamic color when you add that water to it. And something else you can do with those water-based markers is use a piece of plastic. I like to recycle Ziploc bags and use them in this process. Color all over the top of it and then add some water, and you've got this little paint palette where you can pull that pigment and paint with it. So you can color on that surface and then dissolve those lines, or you can do what I'm doing, which is using that plastic surface as a place to pull that pigment and then continue to paint. So this is one of my favorite budget-friendly ways to stretch a supply and push it in a couple of different ways. So not only can I draw with that marker, and I'm going to continue to actually add details and lines with it as I move forward, but I can also use it for that watercolor type of pigment, which is so handy, again, if you're working on a budget. Often too, if I'm traveling or if I'm creating outside, instead of taking my watercolors, I'll actually bring a set of water-based markers just because they tend to behave better for me when I'm on the go or out and about. It's just an easy way to, again, pull something that looks and feels a lot like watercolors without having to pull out your paint palette and a big set when you are creating. And this is going to look and feel a lot like a watercolor painting paired with pen and details here and there. What I like to do is work back and forth with contrast. So I'm always looking, no matter what kind of subject matter I'm playing around with, I'm always looking to create this push and pull between light color, dark elements and details, maybe something that looks like a foreground and background. And again, I'm always keeping this in the front of my brain when I'm working on a surface like this, regardless of the supplies that I'm using, regardless of my budget. So one of the best tips I can give those of you who have cheaper supplies, or you're limited with your supplies, or you're working on a budget, is it actually doesn't matter, how bougie or fancy those supplies are, but if you've got a really good understanding of color or of contrast, of space within that surface, it truly does not matter what type of supplies you're using. So I'm over here using a kid's Crayola pen, but because I'm able to really think about and elevate things through the use of dark lines, light lines, dark areas of color, lighter areas of color, you're going to watch this pretty simple floral come to life really quickly through the use of incredibly cheap, simple, limited supplies. So what I really enjoy doing with something like this, especially when I've actually limited my color, so we're only working with blue and some black pen, is to play around with different shades of that blue. I want my flowers, my subject matter to pop, but I want to still incorporate different shades of blue. So I'm being really mindful about that as I work my way across the surface. Just like I would with watercolors, I water things down if I want a lighter shade of blue, and then I really get heavy with that pigment from my pen if I want something darker. So lots of water if you want a light shade when working with those pens, and then less water if you want some really, really dark saturated pigment. And what I'm going to be doing is going in with just a cheap old black ballpoint pen to just start outlining things. My style is a lot more illustrative than realistic, and I really depend on line work in a lot of the things that I create. And a lot of times I would use a Sharpie or a fancy Micron pen for drawing, but I really wanted to grab a ballpoint pen just to show you all how you can push it and use something that's probably in your junk drawer already to get creative. And what I'm doing is just what I would do with any other pen. Doing line work, I'm adding little details here and there, but then I'm taking that black pen and going around some of the edges of my flowers to really get them to pop and stand out against that background and stand out against each other. So you'll notice I'm kind of working around the edges of things, going inside those little nooks and crannies, and I'm doing just a little bit of cross hatching, a little bit of just messy sketching, scribbling around the edges of things just to darken things up here and there. And you'll notice as this evolves, the darker I go along edges or in between space, the more things start to pop off that page. So a flower is going to suddenly move to the foreground, and then that darker blue moves to the background. And it's just by using and thinking about contrast that enables you. It's really just a trick. It's really a hack and a shortcut when it comes to drawing, that you can really utilize contrast in this way to get a simple surface to start to look quite elevated. And so through the use of just these two simple supplies of Crayola marker and a ballpoint pen, I can really quickly create all these different shades and colors that really elevate everything happening on that surface. And something that's cool about most ballpoint pens is they tend to be relatively permanent. I can't speak for all ballpoint pens, but I do enjoy using them in combination with wet media. Most of the time, they will not bleed. So if you are in a pinch or if you are on a budget, I already know you probably have something in your junk drawer, something in your backpack, your car, your purse, wherever, that will probably work. I love using a black pen that is relatively permanent because I like to go back and forth into things with wet media and my brush. So a ballpoint pen is going to hold up fairly well when it comes to working with watercolors or ink. It's not going to be Perfect, and all of them will perform a little bit differently, but I do want to at least give you a little bit of inspiration and empower you to maybe just pull something out from that junk drawer if you are working on a budget. And I use it just like I would a beautiful, fancy drawing pen. I use lots of line work, lots of sketching, lots of cross hatching, lots of outlining things here and there. And at this point, as my surface is evolving, as those florals are evolving, I am really playing with lines and color and getting things to pop. Everything I do, it's just my vibe, it's my style. I want things to have this element of pop to them. So darkening things up, going around edges with something darker, or even shading here and there with some additional color is going to create that element of pop that my eye as an artist so desperately wants whenever I'm creating anything. And something you can do to touch things up is to actually use a little bit of cheap acrylic white paint to add little pops of highlights here and there. So you all are probably used to seeing me use a white Uniball, but those are a little bit spendy. I want you to see that you can create those same highlights with some acrylic paint really easily. In the same way that I like to darken things up to create that contrast, I really love to finish things off by adding highlights, lightening things up here and there. So any space, anything that's too dark, any edges that I feel like need some extra pop or something else going on, I'll add a little bit of white to it. So I'm going to call this surface pretty much done. This was a quick one for me. This took me about 30 minutes in real time, but it's just a fun little example to show you all how far you can push just really simple everyday supplies that you absolutely can work and create on a budget without pressure to go out and buy the fancy stuff. And I'm going to continue to share inspiration with ways that you can hack the system and play around with different things to create some really dynamic art.